Winners lose more than losers do. What I mean when I say that is if you think about Tom Brady, think of how many interceptions you threw. If you think about all these all-time greats, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. When you're a winner, it means you have to lose, and that's fine. But the difference between a winner and a loser is a loser quits when it gets hard. A loser quits when they can't go on anymore. A winner, they persevere through the losses and they find their victory. Find your victory.
Spit truth for the fighters. Tighten your straps. No pain, no gain. Feel the thunder in the rap. Win with Nabs. Hear the bell. We don't fold. Legends rise here. Stories always told. Retro grit fusion. Hip hop souls bold. Victory is ours. Let the saga unfold.
Welcome to Win with Nabs, where we're putting a spin on podcasts and hopefully a grin on your face. With me today, I am honored to have someone I respect a lot as my first guest. So much so that I'm culturally obligated and very proud to call him uncle. Audie Attar is one of the most influential figures in combat sports and athlete representation. He's the founder and CEO of Paradigm Sports, the agency behind some of the biggest names in MMA and the combat world. But before he was negotiating multi-million-dollar deals, he was a linebacker for UCLA, a first-generation immigrant navigating the American dream, and a fighter in his own right, both inside and outside of sports. Today, we're taking off our gloves, grabbing our briefcases, and diving deep into the real story of Audie Attar, his journey, his biggest challenges, and the lessons he's learned along the way. Uncle Audie, welcome to the show.
Nabs, I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited for you, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you, Uncle. So let's jump right in. So you were a linebacker for UCLA for 4 years. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I actually started out as a safety, and I loved the contact of the game. I loved to hit, and so I think it was my redshirt junior year, I made the switch down to linebacker. I loved getting in there in the box, but nonetheless, you're always thinking protect the run first as a linebacker, whereas safety, because if it's play action, you're going to get beat deep, and I was a sucker for the contact, so sometimes I was a sucker on play action as well. So it was a great time, fond memories, and I had a great time. And I played at UCLA 4 years. I played one season at Idaho State as well, which was also some great memories. But I loved it.
And how in contact are you still with your teammates? I think we were talking about it yesterday. You were telling me that you're still in contact with some of your teammates. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lifelong brotherhood, right? And or fraternity, however you want to look at it. But I'm still in contact with a lot of my teammates from both UCLA and Idaho State.
So what really stuck out to me when I was looking into your profile and figuring out what your collegiate athlete experience was like is that you got into a bar fight. So before I ask anything else, did you win the bar fight?
I won almost all my fights I ever got in when I was younger. I think maybe there's only one fight in junior high that I may not have won. And look, at the time, when you're younger, there's a lot of things happening. I was born in Iraq, Baghdad, Iraq. A lot of things started to shift here as it relates to a lot of geopolitical issues and wars with Iraq in particular, which is where I was born. And then, the terrible terrorist attack on 9/11 that affected all of us as Americans. But, ultimately, when you're also an Iraqi Muslim American, things are going to be said. I'm full-on American, but I'm proud of my heritage as well. I'm proud of who I am. At the time, I think a few of those fights came from the fact that I have my brother who passed away's name tattooed on me in Arabic. Now, for those that don't read Arabic, they may think something else, and that usually led to some altercations. The adult in me now looks back and says, you would have been much stronger if you would have just walked away, right? Turn the cheek, walk away, be the bigger man, and, even if someone puts their hands on you, there's a way to always avoid that, right? It's easier to have things put in perspective in hindsight. At the time, you're a young man, you're proud, and ultimately you're defending yourself, and so that usually led to some altercations. I'll tell you, being at a bar, young man,
it's not a good combination.
Good things don't usually come out of a situation like that, right? So at the end of the day, Certainly not proud of those things, but you also have to stand up for what's right.
I mean, I also think it's not something that you should necessarily shy away from, right? Because it's part of your journey, it's part of your story, and most importantly, you learn something from it. And if you had to say you had one major takeaway from that particular event in time, that bar fight, what would it be?
I should have gotten into MMA from football. And I joke, but even a lot of my former teammates would always say that. It's like the irony that you got into the combat sports world is not lost on anybody, but you should have probably also had your, go at trying to compete when you were a young man and still, in my high level athletic mode, if you will. So, but all jokes aside, I think the biggest takeaway is that, I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed of it. It's who I am. It's what happened. Because I was also a college football player, even back then, pre-social media, it was on the ESPN ticker when I got in trouble, or the LA Times, or what have you. So, it's what it is. It's public information. It's not something that I'm able to hide from, and that's just by virtue of the role that I was in. But at the same time, that also comes with responsibility. Had I taken my older, wiser, more experienced advice, I could have avoided all that, and I could have potentially done much better in certain respects. That's a learning lesson for me to carry forward, because it's not like it was the last time I ever encountered some stuff like that, nor would it be even the last as a grown man. And so how do you handle those situations? As a 21, 22-year-old young man is much different than I would handle it now, turning 45 this year.
Well, I think it's obviously a great thing that...
I'm dating myself.
You're not that old. It's a great thing that you have this perspective, right? Because if you were to handle it the same way now as you would have then, there would have been no growth.
None.
But it shows that your character obviously has changed a lot between now and then. If you think about the parallel between a man who's further along in his professional career, very successful, done all these amazing things, versus still very successful, but a brash young college student, right, who's on the line. It's a very different experience, right? So I wanted to segue into something that you said, and I thought this was very inspiring. You said, quote, "I remember my business plan was laughed at by a lot of people, but you've got to have conviction and be ready to weather the storm because it's not a linear journey." So I said this because I wanted to segue into talking about how that pivotal moment helped you build your business. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, where's that quote from?
It's from a previous interview you did with Boardroom.
That's absolutely true. And the feeling isn't good. It's almost like the same feeling of when you make a mistake, like those fights, and you're like so embarrassed, and you get kicked off the team, and you get this and that and the other. It's like, it's embarrassing, right? You feel ashamed. You feel, demoralized to some extent, right? But at the end of the day, if you believe in who you really are and you continue to fight the good fight and push through all the negativity and all those, uncomfortable feelings, if you will, then you're gonna eventually persevere, right? But if you succumb to all that, you end up becoming the person you don't want to be. You end up achieving the things that you
don't want to achieve.
You don't want to achieve, and then you never achieve the things that you've set your sights on, right? And so life is a crazy journey that is also, so fragile, and anything could go wrong at any moment, including your life could end at any moment, right? And so ultimately, I think that's kind of how I'm wired, and based on my own life experiences, it's wired me that way, right? And it's wired me to really stay focused and stay true to who I am. And even though I've veered and made mistakes, I've always somehow find my way back on the path, right? And so long as I don't beat myself down for those mistakes, or, rationalize why I'm, making the mistake, or why I veered off my path, so to speak, and I get back to the path, I think ultimately I will always find that happiness, right? I will always achieve those goals. And it may not look exactly like I had envisioned, but it will look something very close, and sometimes it will exceed your expectations.
And I would imagine that you're using those lessons that you learned, the hard lessons, right? Because like you said, some of them come with public embarrassment, or even it's just difficult to deal with, right? I would imagine you learned a lot from them, and you use it as almost fuel or motivation to be like, you know what? I did these things, and in the future, I'm going to be better, and whatever, however that may look like, right? Building on what was once a mistake and turning it into something as, I can do better, and this is how I'm going to improve. This is what I learned. This is what I'm not going to do again.
You hit the nail on the head, because ultimately, I mean, we are all, I mean, I'll use just a technology analogy. I mean, our brain's like, it's a software. And so if you're just running off the old software and you're not updating that software every time you go through an experience, not just the good, but particularly the bad and the ugly, I think you're never going to see growth. And there's always all these great people that always, validate this, and it's true that, growth, the most growth really happens through pain and suffering, through loss, right? It's usually that when we win, we get to, it's not comfortable, I don't know the appropriate word, because you could say comfortable, you could say complacent, you could say content, just depending on how you look at things. I think content is probably the best way to look at something, but even though you're content, meaning you feel, fortunate and you're acknowledging the good, if you will, you can't get too comfortable, and you certainly can't get complacent, right? Because that's where people then don't grow. That's why usually you see the most growth coming from the pain, the suffering, the loss, and they're able to like really, process that, upgrade the software, make the corrections, and then keep going, right? But ultimately, I think what at this phase too, what I'm also trying to continue to develop is not only doubling down on those, like say, theoretical practices and mindsets, if you will, but also when it's good, feel blessed, feel fortunate, don't get ahead of yourself, stay even keeled, keep the same energy that when you were, hungry and or ashamed and or embarrassed and or whatever you're feeling from those pain, suffering, and losses, keep that same energy when you're winning, when everything's good. Because I think far too often people think that these things last forever, and the reality of it is back to the fragility of life. The fragility of everything is real. So if you take your foot off the pedal when things are good, or when things are calm, or when things are consistent, if you will, and you think that that's going to be like that forever, you're wrong. And so I think it's about trying to keep that same energy, that same focus, that same drive, that same mindset, and whether it's bad, ugly, and or good, right?
Well, on that same note about suffering, that kind of reminded me about something Mr. NVIDIA, Jensen Huang himself said, which is that if you're in a startup and you're not suffering, I wish you suffering because you're not doing something right, right? You got to put your head down, you got to work, suffer through those hard times, suffer through the good times, right? Because there's no good without bad, and there's no bad without good, right?
I think the greatest thing that we have today as humans is the access to all these types of amazing people and how they think through new forms of media, new forms of content, new forms of literature, if you will, be it whether it's a book or an ebook or an audiobook or what have you, right? But you're starting to really like peel the onion back, and it's not, gone are the times where Jensen's only giving, kind of investor updates to the capital markets and or product release only, right? It's actually, you're learning a little bit more about the human being and the journey, right? And to his point, and to everybody's point, if you're not suffering on your journey, the reality of it is that either you're just fortunate and you've missed that, let's call it that energy early on, but it's not to say that it's not going to come. It will come, right? But if you're building something from the ground up too, there's no way you're not suffering. It's like you're not even able to pay rent early days. You're like trying to figure out how do you pay for not only any of your operational expenses, but eventually pay yourself, and then whether you're raising money or you're not raising money. I mean, I always find too many people think that, I have this great idea, I'm going to go raise the money. I'm like, well, let me tell you, I did that, and I was laughed at, and I didn't raise money. So then what? What are you going to do?
What's your plan now?
Yeah, You got hit in the face. Everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, as Mike Tyson says, right? So what's your plan? You're just going to give up? Does your idea not work unless you need the money? Which, if that's the case, then you really never had an idea. You really, so you have to try to find a way. And that is part of the suffering I think Jensen's referring to as it relates to starting a company or as an entrepreneur in general, because you have to find a way. And the best innovations usually come from scarcity, not from all these resources and yes, I'm fully funded and all these different teams. And it's not. It's when your back's against the wall, that's what you see in someone. You're like, okay, what are they like as a leader? How do they think under pressure and under all this, let's call it resistance that's basically trying to stop them from achieving their goal? And it can come in so many different forms, but at the end of the day, it's what it is. It's resistance. So how do you break through that? And there's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but perseverance and resilience are the two key, I think, elements that you have to have. And then, fighting the good fight is what it is.
So when you're in those championship rounds or round 14 in Rocky or whatever you want to call it, when your back was against the wall, how did you found Paradigm Sports? I mean, you just talked about how you were laughed at, investors want to give you money, you had all these different troubles, you experienced a lot of discrimination. How did you persevere? How did you build it from the ground up?
Just thinking back to it, I remember how you feel all that pain, but the reality of it is nobody cares. And so you can't feel sorry for yourself. You can't look at these things and say, this, that, or the other, or, oh, this, I can't do it because of this reason or that reason. It's like you're basically blaming, other things as opposed to focusing on you. And the reality of it is that's what's beautiful about the American dream. It's that resilience. It's a war of attrition. You gotta get up every day is a fight, right? And so whether it was back in the early days, where people were just literally immigrating here and on horse and buggy and or wagons and making the trip cross country and trying to settle in a new state that just was essentially just hell every day, right? Or in modern times, it's the same thing. It's a fight. Even though we've gotten so comfortable with how far we've come as a human race, with all these luxuries and all these tools and all this democratization of information even and learning, the reality of it is it's still a grind. It's just a different grind.
I mean, the other problem is I feel like nowadays people draw these arbitrary lines in their head. Oh, I can't do this. Or like you said, oh, if I can't get money, well, then my startup will never work. And they just never pursue an idea in the first place. And I just feel like what's missing is just this initial drive, this tenacity to compete, to win, which is why I think I love fight sports so much. To be a champion, you have to have the heart of a champion. It's not just about having the skill or the talent or the physical ability. It's about putting in the work when no one's watching. And you put in a lot of work when no one was watching. So can you explain to us how exactly you founded Paradigm Sports? How did you recruit athletes? How did you build rapport? Walk us through it.
Yeah, I started as really more of an NFL agent, right? So when I worked for two different companies beforehand, I decided I was like, okay, I want to keep, not only growing as an individual agent, but my aspirations were growing as well. And I decided to go back to business school. And so when I was in business school, and everybody as an agent traditionally was like, has a JD or is a lawyer, right? And so I was like, well, how do I differentiate myself? And I also had this, these ambitions of growing a business, right? And growing a business around our athletes as well. And leveraging not only their now famously called NIL, name, image, and likeness, but leveraging their IP, if you will, and saying, okay, we could build media entertainment, we could build business ventures. And that was at a time when nobody was doing things like that. And so I really, had a purpose-driven mission as well as a former athlete to help my friends, my former teammates. And I was like, there has to be a deeper connection and a relationship that you could establish as opposed to just negotiating their contracts and that's it. So traditionally, that's usually what it was, and there was definitely some marketing, but it wasn't like it was, delivered to every client, and which is still the case, because at the end of the day, it's like even in the NFL, for example, the bottom roster of an NFL team, those players aren't necessarily receiving crazy amount of marketing deals, right? College players now are getting more marketing
Insane
deals
money.
with the shift in the landscape of the NIL market and the transfer portal and all these things that are I never thought would happen that are taking place now. So I really wanted to build something different, right? And ultimately, I did all my research to say, okay, if I differentiate myself as a former player to go get an MBA and then maybe do a master's in dispute resolution, which is through a law, I went to Pepperdine University, I went to Pepperdine Business School, and then Pepperdine Law had a dispute resolution curriculum as well. I said, okay, that helps me differentiate myself, right, as a former player, MBA, which thinking more business, right, and wanted to sharpen my tools, and also, take my natural business acumen, but really try to understand it from an academic perspective, and then apply it from a practical perspective as well. So I embarked on doing that, and then while I was in that program, in those two programs, everything I did was centered around what I was building. From my business plans, whether it was in a marketing class or in an accounting class, finance, business law, negotiations, whatever it was really centered around what I was building. And it was still heavy in football at the time, but I had then made sure that, through those efforts, I had realized, okay, I was fluid. I was staying open-minded. I'm like, well, let's focus on high-growth sports. And I was always a fan of mixed martial arts. I grew up participating in martial arts, like in practicing martial arts, as most kids did, in my era, I should say, or in my neighborhood, right? And my father was a martial artist. My brother was a martial artist. So it was already in my family. My family loved combat sports. I had an uncle who was a boxing champion. So there's a lot of already familial ties and my own practical experience. But as a fan of the UFC at the time too, which was an emerging sport, I'm like, this is going to be the biggest sport in the world, and the UFC as the catalyst was paving the way. And so I really saw an opportunity to adjust my business plan and really think about the future, which was focusing on building best-in-class management in high-growth sports, media and entertainment, and then obviously with the clients that you have the opportunity with, you build some business ventures as well. So it all came about and it was fully crystallized in graduate school, and that I just embarked on it. I started, a couple clients that were, I was working with from the previous firm, wanted to take a shot with me. They came over, and then it was just trying to recruit every year,
And what was that constant grind like? Were you actively pursuing these people, or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's a constant grind. You have to be persistent. You can't have hesitation in anything that you're doing when it's sales. Sales is effectively what you're doing, right? So recruiting is effectively selling. So outreach, you can't. It's to your point. It's not about the shots that you make; it's the shots that you don't take. And so you can't. Get demoralized by no's, or people just not choosing you, or people not calling you back, or not responding, or saying they're going to do something, then they don't do it. And I could give you a million different examples, but it's almost the same as the embarrassment and the shame and the resistance that we were talking about. It's like you can't allow that to demoralize you and stop the output that it takes, because it's about that output, the consistent output, consistent effort to push through, because eventually, when you get different opportunities, that's the first step of the win. But then the real wins are what you deliver to them, right?
So I just want to interject really quick on something that you said. So you said that you shouldn't let it demoralize you. And I completely agree. And I think that the reality is for a lot of people, they let it get to them. And they let all these things other people say or don't say or do get in their heads. So for you, what has been effective in cutting out all the noise, zoning in, and doing what you need to do? Because for a lot of people, it's a problem that when they hear all these things saying, you can't do this, or I don't believe in you, or you're never going to make it, all these different things, some people approach demoralization very differently, right? Some people are more tough, some people aren't tough.
Yeah.
So for you personally, how have you been able to persevere through all of that and say, I don't care what you think, I'm going to do my own thing? How did you do that?
I mean, I think we all have those voices, whether it's third-party voices or voices in our own head that constantly, are pulling you one way or another, right? And in this case, it's like, it's not that it didn't hurt. It's not that I didn't feel it, and that I'm just stone cold and my mind's so strong that. And I think that's honestly not true if anybody ever says that, because every human goes through that, and every human questions themselves at some point, right? And whether that's because someone initiated it and threw that out towards your way and thus hurt your feelings and made you think twice, or you're just like, can I really do this? Can I? It's like that's normal. That's normal. And I can tell you that I've been fortunate to not only work with some amazing people, both from the sports world and the business world, but I've gotten also to meet some amazing people. And I'm a constant student of the game, if you will, because I love to read, I love to learn, and ultimately, what one thing I found is that we all go through that. And so one of the things I try to do is, validate my own emotions and acknowledge them, because at the end of the day, they're there, right? If you just brush it away, you're not dealing with it. I'd rather face you head on like a fight, and I'm gonna fight it, right? Because that's what it takes. You have to fight that. And you have to basically, whatever works for you, but for me, it's like doing the things that I know that get me back to center, right? So whether it's, talking to myself and effectively negotiating and proving myself right, as opposed to giving in to these negative thoughts and or doubts, or doing things like a breathing exercise, and or if I need to make sure if it's a subject matter that I got to go back and dig it. Let me double check. Let me confirm, right? Because ultimately it just takes you to lean into that situation, and whatever dynamic it is, it's like you got to just do it. I mean, famous thing in Nabs, by the way, for those of you that don't know, this guy's gone through an amazing transformational journey himself.
Thank you.
The guy's just crushing it, and I'm so proud of him. But think about that. Think about every morning at the beginning of that journey.
Oh my gosh.
You didn't want to wake up.
Brutal.
Your body was so sore, and you're like, can I really do this? Do I really want to do this? And all those thoughts that came through your head.
I mean, even though it's funny, right? The other day we went to dinner, and
you and I were
we were death staring a piece of bread because we're very anti-carbs, right? Trying to limit that carb intake.
Not anti, I love them.
We love them, but they don't love our bodies, right? We were just death staring these beautifully looking piece of bread. I mean, they were very good looking.
So good.
My dad caved in. He had some of the bread.
Yeah, he sampled
a little
he made
piece.
Sure it wasn't poisonous.
But just this whole point of reinforcement and mental toughness is just, you got to death stare at the bread sometimes.
Got to death stare it, man. You can't avoid problems. The people that just try to avoid problems and don't deal with them head on, they will resurface one way, shape, or form in a different way, and potentially compounded to be even more powerful of a, let's say, a resistance force, if you will, right? So it's like, just hit it head on, and it's not easy. I'm not making it seem like it's not easy. Get that through your head. So like, but nothing great is easy. Nothing great is easy, So like at the end of the day, if you could constantly remind yourself these things, give yourself that validation, give yourself that push that you need sometimes, figuratively speaking, it will allow you to work through any doubt, fear, or roadblock / resistance, if you will, that then gets you to center. And then whatever you got to do, breathing, light therapy, exercise, meditation, prayer, whatever it works for you, you got to do, right? Because it's about the software, but the hardware is just as important. And as you get older, you start to realize that even more, right? So how do you keep yourself, at optimal levels?
Peak performance all times.
Levels, right? At all times. And that is a job, man. It's a job. And you still have to try to enjoy life, and to each his own. Everybody has their own, meaning of that, right?
So I just want to interject there on what you just said. how do you personally balance work and life, right? Because I know for a lot of people, especially you're a big family man, but you also care about your businesses. So where do you draw that line? How do you find that balance to make sure that you're spending an adequate amount of time working on your businesses, but also you love your family, right? And you want to spend time with your family. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, I mean, and you and I had a little conversation about this, when we were sitting down just talking about what's to come for you, right? There's no formula. It is absolutely hard because time is finite. But as you grow older, your obligations grow. From a business perspective,
Of course.
then you get married. If you decide you want to have a family, you have kids. So then, their lives are more important than yours, right? So then that continues to eat away at that time, limited time that you have per day. I found myself, reflecting on that I'm proud of is that I'm just trying to be present in whatever I'm doing. And I have an amazing support system at home that really is the most important thing to me. So as soon as I feel like if that is slipping, then I know what I'm cutting. You know what I mean? At this stage, I know what I'm cutting, and it won't be them, right? So ultimately, it's just trying to be present in everything you do, trying to compartmentalize. Some people are more organized than others, You're an amazing, especially at your age, it's so impressive how organized, disciplined, regimented you are. And I would say I'm still like, I'm a flower. So I don't forget things, and I don't but at the same time, I've gotten a lot better at trying to systemize those things as well, but I have a lot of room for improvement. I'm not even on the Nabs level yet, right? So ultimately, I think whatever speaks to you is important, but staying present in whatever it is that you're doing, staying true to your purpose professionally and personally, and sometimes things are going to get so chaotic, and all those doubt and those fears and those questions,
All those voices start to talk in your
it
head.
just starts to challenge you, but that's when you see what you're made of. That's when the resilience comes out. That's when the true warrior in you comes out, right? Because ultimately, I think it's like life is as you said it, and as I've said it before, it's just not linear. It's going to take you through twists and turns, and you got to be ready for it all.
So speaking of being a warrior, let's talk about a warrior, right? You created the greatest mixed martial arts brand and helped facilitate one of the greatest brands of all time in sports history. Walk us through Conor McGregor. You talk about that experience a little bit?
Well, I didn't create Conor McGregor. Conor McGregor's mom and dad created Conor McGregor, and Conor McGregor created Conor McGregor. I mean, he is a once-in-a-generation type of athlete, right? He is not only
Amazing.
and you look at his accomplishments as an athlete, he's done everything every martial artist dreams of doing. As an entrepreneur, as a brand, as a personality, he really has this natural acumen about him. And he got it early, right? Because at the end of the day, social media and new media and all that stuff today, 10 years ago, it was emerging, if you will, right? It was around, but people didn't necessarily know how to leverage that like he did. And he was really good at it, right? And I think that in the fight game, you have to do that because at the end of the day, teams in a team kind of sports environment, during the NFL season, there's 17 weeks. Games are going to be either on Sunday, Monday, and then eventually the season rolls on, Thursday and Saturday kick in. It's cadence, it's scheduled. We're going to know next year's schedule. We know what it is. So you tune into your team, and that's what happens. So the players don't necessarily have to do anything but get ready to perform as an athlete, right? They don't have to promote the game. They're not worried about how many viewers tune in. They're not worried about any of that. Whereas in the fight game, the athletes actually are incentivized, right? Whether monetarily early on or the fact that they could get to that point and leverage their platforms to show, hey, I do put butts in the seat from a gate revenue perspective. My pay-per-views actually are one of the highest selling pay-per-views, so that helps them either if they have pay-per-view participation in their existing contract, or if they're about to negotiate a new deal. And then they could show some data as to, why their market value should be what it is. And I think Conor got that very early. And it was great because we really flowed well together in understanding and believing in what his true value was before anybody else did, right?
Well, something I've always respected about him and found super fascinating is, like you said, this attention to detail, this charisma. Like you can't like make that up. Like that's just natural. And his ability to enamor audiences and captivate people, and really just, like you said, be ahead of the social game before anyone else was there, and build one of the greatest fan bases and all of this hype, all of this support, and become the double champ, do all these amazing things, is truly just incredible. So during that experience, what are some of the challenges that come with working with these world-class, amazing athletes?
Yeah, I think he certainly has that it factor. You can't teach that.
He's that guy.
That guy. I think many after him tried to like almost replicate their own version of how he handled himself and how he was just brash, but it was so authentic when he did it that when other people tried to do it, you saw through it.
It's like they're mimicking him.
It's like they're mimicking him, and for a while, people would criticize that too. And I think it's kind of come back to more everybody being their authentic self. But for a while, it was almost uncomfortable to see other people trying to be like him when they're just forcing something that's not natural, where it's supernatural to him, right? And the fast-paced environment that we were in, we were really looking ahead always. Even though, like I said, in the fight game, when a fight happens as early as potentially weeks if it's a replacement, but usually 8 to 12 weeks before the event is when hey, we got to fight. So you get into camp, and then you're doing the promotion. So in between that, you really can't project out when the next fight would be. You have some understanding, particularly as you get to Conor's level, right? But we were also thinking about, okay, how are we going to build brands? How do we leverage this data? And part of my job was to see the it factor and really kind of continue to see our exponential rise and growth, not just from an athletic perspective, but the business side, the social analytics. How do we leverage that? How do we monetize that? How do we convert that into sponsorship deals? How do we convert that into business venture opportunities? How do we leverage that and get the Floyd Mayweather fight to really happen, right? So there's so many different things that I think that I was fortunate enough to be so lucky, right, and to get to work with such a special talent like that. But I also brought my A game as well. And so it was a great partnership in that we were both the top of our game, and we both basically did everything we said we were going to do, And that's very important, because when people doubt you and then, you end up doing exactly what you said you're going to do, you can't, what can you say then, right?
It's like what they say, success is the most powerful form of revenge, right? No one can say anything to you. And I also think, as a fight fan and also just someone who's interested in the game, something that really speaks to me, and I think a lot of other people, is how do you create economic value out of a fighter, right? Because I think it's evident that in fight sports, even in the NFL, in a lot of these sports organizations, and as we're seeing right now with the explosion of NIL deals, the money is clearly not in, okay, you get paid to fight, right? So how do you create economic value as a young athlete? And to any young athletes listening, how would you recommend they go about creating economic value? And whether it's a form of a social media platform or a startup business, how do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously important, right? And I think this is important for all athletes of all sports to think about. But the question really that you start with is, when's the time right? For me, I have 2 young daughters. Both of them are amazing young humans I'm proud of. They're not only great students, great kids, great sisters to each other, great daughters to myself and my wife, great grandkids, great friends. But they're also phenomenal athletes. And I know my 12-year-old has aspirations of becoming an Olympian in flag football in 2028. And she's doing all the right things, and she's on the right path, but she's still 12. And she's on me every day, Dad, I got to start a social media channel. Dad, you know this more than anyone. I'm like, Babe, yeah, I know this, but as a parent, I don't think it's the right time, right? Because ultimately, it's also about your craft. The most important thing that I think young athletes get confused about is thinking that they have to build this brand, they have to get ready for the NIL. The reality of it is you haven't even made it to get a D1 offer yet, right? So focus on your craft. Focus on the things that are going to get you there and keep you there and hopefully get you to your ultimate goal, right? But if you start worrying about all this stuff too early, I just think it's a distraction. And it could also be detrimental to the kid, right, in different ways, right? So that's my personal opinion, but everybody's free to choose what they want. And I have friends, and my daughter has teammates that have social media, and they're great kids, great parents, great families. That's their choice, right? My choice, per my experience, is what I shared, right? But when you do get to that point, I think high school is probably that right time, you got to also remember, like, everybody's watching everything nowadays. Whatever you put online, whatever you send via text, just assume that it's going to be the front page of. We used to say newspapers back in the day, but again, that's
social. We'll say social media, Instagram,
front
TikTok,
page of the reels. You know, the top reel that shows up in everybody's feed on whatever platform we're talking about. So that you just be ready for that, because that's the reality. Whatever you send via Snap, you think it disappears. Well, someone must have captured it. You know what I mean? So you just got to think ahead about what the pros and the cons are. Obviously, building an audience is great. You know, from a follower count, from an engagement perspective. Don't go and buy followers. Don't go and do these things that inflate your numbers, because brands and there's technology that actually could see through that type of stuff. Just build organically. Build around substance. And if it starts to become a distraction, meaning it's taking you away from your training, it's taking you away from your rest and recovery, it's taking you away from your studies, it's not making you a good human, and you're having issues with your own family, that should be a red flag. You need to put that on pause or figure it out before you continue to allow that to bring you down, right? And because the reality of it is, too, nowadays, everything you see online, it doesn't mean it's real. Everybody, as we say, they're stunting. You know,
everyone has multiple faces.
Everybody's fronting or stunting. You know, everybody's showing the good life, but it's like, is that real? You know, so keep it authentic, right? Keep it authentic, and then more importantly, like the people are still, you know, wired to generate a first impression, the first few seconds, if you will, that they meet someone for whatever reason. It could be your visual, could be what you say, could be how you smell. So present yourself online and offline the same way. Be a consistent person. Because if you could always have that high character, I'm telling you, you'll always find yourself eventually in the good situation, right?
I mean, I also want to rewind to what you just said, which is that a problem nowadays is everyone's posting the great stuff, right? Everyone's posting, look at me, I just won this thing, or look at how awesome I'm doing, or all these successes. And it's creating this perception amongst especially young people nowadays that life is perfect, especially for celebrities and stuff, because you only see the upside, you only see the good. And even if you think about some of these entrepreneurs who are only posting, oh, I just had this massive startup exit, this unicorn exit, and all these different successes. Or even if you think about people lifting and how people think that like a 225-pound bench press is like average now, right? And all these like distortions of what's average and what's normal because of social media. And we're really seeing people break down and not be certain of, well, should I be confident in myself? Because look at all these amazing things everyone else is doing, but look at me, right? And I feel like that's really started to be a problem because, like you said, people don't post the bad. Because you don't want to share the ugly, right?
Yeah.
You don't want other people to know your problems. You don't want other people to know your faults. And I feel like a lot of what's happening now is just people are masquerading. You're not showing all the bad stuff.
Right.
So speaking of all of that bad stuff, right, what would you say is the hardest part of managing fighters or working with big personalities, especially when it comes into negotiations? Because obviously everyone wants something different. And so how do you, as an agent, as a manager, look out for your fighters, protect their best interests, and make sure that you make good deals happen?
Well, I think it starts with preparation, right? You have to really do your homework and understand what, the true market value of that athlete and or that opportunity is. And, it really is so important that you're as prepared as you can be. In some dynamics, particularly in the fight game, it's not as easy as it is in the NFL, NBA. The disclosure of purses isn't transparent, you know? So even if you go and the fight is in a certain jurisdiction where that athletic commission posts the purses, a lot of times there's side letters for particularly the bigger names. There's always a side agreement that effectively is part of the compensation package, but it's not reported to the commission. So if you're going out there and you're trying to aggregate data and you're trying to understand kind of what fair market value, it could become tricky, right? And so obviously having been in the business for so long, having done so many deals across all the different promotions, we actually have a good finger on the pulse. It's still not an exact science, right? Like you're afforded into.
Like you can't quantify value. Exactly.
You could, but you can't exactly, right? It's an argument. So at the end of the day, can you substantiate that argument to the extent, and you're a great debater, so you get this, right? So can you substantiate your argument and or your position on what you believe is fair market value? And will the other side, effectively make a concession because they agree with you? And that's hard. It's really hard to do, but it's part of the job. That's what they hired us to do, right? So the other part that's important is really educating the client on that. Because at the end of the day, they are very smart, but they're professional athletes. So while they have a lot of natural acumen, and it ranges from athlete to athlete, but while some of them could be even very intelligent, right? Without the classical training from an academic perspective, without the practical experience in terms of having negotiated thousands of deals themselves, if you will, they still have a good business acumen, right? So it's about educating them on the process, the findings, the research, the value, the data and evidence that you're substantiating your position with, but not to mention the process, because the process could get taxing and emotional. Because at the end of the day, they're so proud about what they do. Sometimes an offer can offend them. And so it's our job to educate them on the process, but also keep them to stay focused and not emotional, because these things take time, right? So the bigger the deal is, the more time it takes too. So ultimately, there's probably going to be several iterations back and forth of this process. And, the fighter is still looking at it like, this is me you're talking about.
I put my literally blood, sweat, and tears into this.
So like, what the F is this offer? That's offensive. It's a slap in the face. So, and I get it. I agree with them. But that's not going to get us to the finish line, right? So we have to stay focused, remove the emotion, get back to center, and really try to engage them as much as we can without overdoing it. And some clients just tell us, look, I don't want to deal with it because I need to stay focused at the task at hand, which is me training and getting in there to perform. Just come to me when it's ready. Some clients want to be involved with great updates. So it's not a one-size-fits-all answer, but it's very important that you're prepared for all elements. And at the end of the day, just making sure you're delivering and protecting and also educating the client along the way.
Whether it be because of emotional or other factors, are there any really big negotiations that almost fell through because of something like that? All of them?
All of them. There's never a negotiation that is like, oh yeah, you go into it thinking, yeah, we're going to get this done. That's not true. You always have to look at the worst case scenario first. Because the reality of it is that, along with all these, let's call it business elements that we've been discussing, which are many more that we're not even touching on, there's also the human elements, right? And you're still dealing with people on both sides. And the different stakeholders have different opinions and different things that either perk their interest, offends them, gets them to see a different perspective. It's always great when you could do it without emotion and just be very professional about it, but I can't say that that's always the case. It would always be great to say, hey, this is where we want to be, this is where they're all, or we'll meet in the middle. But that's also not a reality, because either the client should get this because this is absolute fair market value, or we don't do it. And from their perspective, it could be like, well, no, we think this is fair market value for their reasons, or we're not going to do anything more. And so at the end of the day, like you go into a negotiation, you have to know what the worst case scenario is. You obviously have your goals, you have your plan, you have, they have their goals, they have their plans, but the fragility of it is that real, right? Sometimes the momentum, the value, the symbiotic nature of a win is there, right? No matter what the dynamic is or who's paying who or whatever. But ultimately, it's still, something to be smart to go into it, to understand the fragility is real and it could fall apart at any time.
So when you're making these very high stakes negotiations, right? When do you know to walk away or cut your losses, right? Because there's obviously going to be times when you can't get everything that you want, and you understand that. So at what point do you decide that? Like, how do you cut your losses?
It's not necessarily systemized to the extent that I could tell you, here, this is what it is, right?
Of course.
You just kind of assess the situation, right? I mean, impasse is a real thing, and impasse is when you get to a point where you're kind of like, you're stuck, and you're like, okay, what do we do now, right? And neither side knows or wants to make a move or whatever. And so ultimately, I think it's just assessing the situation. You're engaging with the client, you're empowering them, you're educating them, and you've pushed this effort, and it's now at an impasse. And it's either like you don't do a deal, you walk away, or potentially, like, in some cases, you end up in litigation, and it's just part of the game.
How things go.
It's just part of the game, So ultimately, it's like, I'm a big believer in trying to figure things out, working through it as hard as you can. There's some cases where I've been really patient and really tried everything I can, and took years before you're like, okay, I'm done with this, right? And you just move on, right? However that is, whatever it means, whether it's breaking, stop pursuing litigation, whatever it means. But I try to always find a solution. Like, I'm not a guy that gives up easy at all.
I mean, you have dispute resolution, right?
Yeah, well, there's that too. But then I don't give up, right? I'm an eternal optimist. I always believe, like, okay, but there has to be a way. And I think that's good. It served me well. And I think it's a great kind of way to approach life in general. Because, again, if you're just like, you're going after something and it doesn't end up going the way you had envisioned, and you're like, oh my God, demoralized. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's like, instead of saying, well, what does that mean? Like, what's the opportunity here, And then almost pivoting and staying fluid and staying alive, if you will, and continuing to push through. That is, I think, a great formula for success, not just in business, but in life. Because life will hit you too.
So on that point about tenacity, right? Because I imagine you've had so many of these difficult negotiations. You've made some tough calls, dealt with insane pressure, and faced a lot of public scrutiny, especially because when you're dealing with these world-class athletes, I mean, obviously, literally, we were talking about it like yesterday. You have all these leaks, you have information that goes out to the public, people criticize you, all these different things. So my question for you is, what has been the toughest fight of your life, professionally, in your career, or however you want to answer that? What is the toughest fight of your life?
Always getting back to my center. Because I've veered off from time to time throughout my entire life. But the toughest fight is always getting back to center, being true to myself. And I'm proud that I keep winning that fight, even though, at times I'm on my heels and I'm like against the ropes or a cage or however you want to analogize it. But I'm always proud of that fight. I'm always proud of really trying to push forward and just being the best version of myself, always. Because I now have my daughters, 12 and 9, they ask everything now. And that also the last couple of years has been whoa, because when they were younger, they weren't, but now they're asking about everything, right? So it's important for me to set that example for them.
So as a father, and especially when you think about some of these family values, how did your spirituality in Islam guide you through some of those tougher moments?
Yeah, look, I'm a proud Muslim. I can't say I'm the most religious person in the world, but I'm proud to be a Muslim American. I'm proud to be an Iraqi Muslim American. And the faith in itself is the way that you and I have been fortunate to experience and learn. Isn't the way, unfortunately, that it's been perceived through media and what like. So for me, it's just about being accepting and knowing that, I have a relationship with the man above, and that I could use my spirituality, whether it's, fasting or whether it's prayer, to kind of also get me back to my center, right? And so, but at the end of the day too, I'm judged by even people within our own faith. I'm not a guy that's apologetic about having tattoos and launched a whiskey company, and you know what I mean? Like, it's just, at the end of the day, I know who I am, and my relationship with God is between me and him, and he's the one that's going to judge me. So on one end, people will judge you, saying, oh, you're a Muslim, you must be a terrorist, this, that, the other, which is, I've been called many times in my life, But on the flip side, too, within your own faith, is like, people are like, you're a sellout, you're not real, you're not a real Muslim. It's like, F you to both sides.
You don't know my story. You don't know what I've done.
You don't know me, and it's not for you to judge. And I'm proud to be an Iraqi, Muslim, American, and nobody can take that away from me.
Mashallah. I'm very proud to hear that, Uncle. And your story, especially for a young Muslim like myself, is very inspiring. Young Muslim American. As a Boy Scout, soon to be Eagle Scout, I'm very proud of my identity as an American, but also as a young Muslim. And it's something that's very important to me. And actually, it's just something that helps me make decisions, right? And especially when you think about business and you think about your values, just having that backbone in Islam is something that I think is very, very powerful. So I'm going to jump to something a little bit different. And it's the fact that you're always hustling. Title, hoop, all of these different things. So my question for you is, when you want to invest in a product, how do you identify a winner?
I like to look at what opportunities exist based on what I feel the market wants and consumers. I'm like, you and I are both consumers. So it's like, at the end of the day, if I look at an opportunity, it's, okay, how does this product, right, fill a need? Would I use this product? Is this something that I feel like my kids, my friends, my family are going to use? Then you go into the more, let's call it, business analysis and research, right? What's the market size? What's the total addressable market? Who are the competitors? What are the price points? And then you got to get in deeper. Look at the team. There's an analogy of when in horse racing, people bet on not just the horse but the jockey.
The jockey.
As an investment, it's making a bet. It's what it is. It's you're thinking that, hey, this thing is gonna win, right? Without the gambling element, but it's figuratively that's what it is, right? So ultimately, it's like you have to look at the team, you have to look at the product, you have to look at all these different opportunities, and I've been very fortunate thus far, but I'm still a student of the game, and I've also picked wrong ones, and at the end of the day, it's like it's one of those things where you have to continue to make sure that you are leaning into the process and not only making the moves and taking your shot, but knowing that you're still a student and you still have a lot to learn, and you don't know everything. And so that combination of that confidence and that ability to go for it, but at the same time staying grounded, humble, and hungry to learn and get better, I think that's so important for everybody.
So figuratively, as a student, I'd say that you're getting another degree, because I hear that right now you might be working on something new in the form of a venture studio. Could you talk a little bit about that? Walk us through what's going on.
Our agency is something I'm so proud of, and we still have a lot of amazing things and aspirations that we're working towards. But I'm also still an entrepreneur, and so Hoop was that catalyst really for launching a venture studio. And for those of you who don't know Hoop, it's a smart AI digital backboard, first of its kind from a technology perspective. It's hardware and software, and now we have distribution. Not only are we still going direct to consumer, but now we're in Best Buy. We're ABT, which is a retailer in Chicago, picked us up. Dick's just picked us up. Costco's now coming on board. So I think 2025 is going to be a really big year for Hoop, and I think now is going to be the big year and the big push for scaling, particularly the Mini, because the Mini is, you could put it in your dorm room, you could put it in your bedroom, you could put it in your office. It's for all ages, and you could stream content on the Hoop Mini, but you could also play our games on it, whether it's the Hoop City Royale, which is, you could play it by yourself online with other people. that also have a mini, and you can play offline with your friends there, or with your friends and with people online, and it's really cool. It's such an amazing product. I'm really excited and proud of not only my partners, Latham Paul, but the team at Hoop, and what we're doing there is just really exciting. So that was really the catalyst, and we have some other projects. I can't talk about the other stuff, but we've just been building, and so. But it goes back to me having a great partner. My wife is just amazing, and she's so supportive. And when COVID happened, we got rid of our offices, and so our team, even on the agency side, is decentralized, based around the world, basically, from Dubai to London to New York, St. Louis to Hawaii to California, right? So we have team members all over the place, and so I've been working from home a lot, which is great for me, because if I travel like I am now, obviously I'm away from the
family,
girls, right? But when I'm home, I like to work from home because I built my own home office, and it just gives me that efficiency of being able to see my family, whether it's the girls in the morning before they go to school, or I do the school drop-offs, or my wife, who I take a lunch break and I eat lunch with her, or we get a workout together at our gym, and to me that creates that efficiency. But I also think that that's what also gives me her really unconditional support. She's like, keep playing the game, keep going after it. And so for me, that is exciting, and it's kind of why I'm constantly hustling. I don't feel like it's work, so I don't clock in, clock out. I'm where I need to be, wherever that is in the world. I'm working from wherever I need to be. But I'm always passionate about what I'm doing. And so it doesn't feel like work. And whether it's a Monday or Tuesday or a Sunday, I'm putting in the time, right? And ultimately, that's what it takes in whatever it is you're pursuing.
So if you had one piece of advice to close out for any young entrepreneurs, forget about entrepreneurs, any young person who's struggling to find their voice, find what they're passionate about, or just in general, what's your advice to them?
Be yourself. Don't worry about what people think. As hard as I know that sounds,
Very cliched, but
it's so cliche,
true.
and it's like, I get it, because I cared, and it hurt me. And so I'm not saying it that from a place or a position of not understanding or having this ability to just tune it out. Nah, but use it as fuel for your fire. I think if you could do that, man, it's like you just invented something so amazing within yourself that it's like a revolutionary product of yourself. You know what I mean? That you're able to take that type of energy and convert it into fuel.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for winning with Nabs. Get ready for episode 2. Thank you so much, Uncle.
Yes, sir.